All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. Right now, we're going to welcome Blythe Brumeleve to our show, host of Cyberly, head of social media marketing, and our social media marketing queen, really. Blythe, thank you for joining us. Today, we're talking about running your marketing team like an NFL team, and hopefully a better one than the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Dang, we starting off football season like this. It's going to be a good year for Jaguar fans. I don't know if most of you caught, the show we did last week on Cyberly, but we covered, Jacksport and, the history, the logistics of getting a football team. So we made it kind of like a full sports episode talking about how to market your company like a sports team. So it was a chance for me to sort of dive into the old roots, even with a new, football season coming up here shortly.
See, I throw that shade at you, but I'm a Cowboys fan, and they haven't won a playoff game since literally before I was born. So, you can throw it right back at me. It's fine.
I will say, fun fact, Jaguars have won more playoff games in the last 20 years than the Dallas Cowboys.
That's my cue. I'm out.
I saw that stat recently, and I was like, I can't wait to use that on somebody. It's rare we get bragging opportunities.
I'm just going to stay quiet with my New Mexico State self here. But Blythe, it's great to know that even if I couldn't make it to the NFL, I can still market like the NFL does. What are going to be some of the takeaways that you can really kind of draw to really being able to prepare your team?
So a few of these that we talked about on last week's show, but I think are really pertinent to the freight industry is treating these big events. So a lot of people are going back to conferences and they're attending virtual events and they're going there and they're taking notes, they're doing all of the right things, and then they probably share those insights with their team whenever they get back. What they should do, and what an idea that they should borrow from sports, is treating those big events like having a war room for those big events. So for example, with the Super Bowl, a lot of big brands and a lot of big companies will have a team that works all day on Super Bowl Sunday, sometimes the weekend, just the entire weekend, and it's a social media team, it's a graphic designer, it's somebody in charge of getting video, it's somebody in charge of the messaging and the platforms that you're going to distribute out to with all of that different messaging. And what they do is they literally watch the event, they document it, they have one person writing, they have one person on graphic design, and they craft that message and they get those messages out there in a timely and efficient manner. So for big events like conferences, I challenge that a lot of different logistics companies out here to take a cue from that plan and to have a war room type setup for whenever your executives or whenever your team are going to a big time conference or a big time event, have a day one recap of everything that you've learned. So then not only are you sharing it with your team, you can then share that on social media, you can share it in an email, you can share it on your website, you can share it on all of these different platforms, instead of what happens a lot of times is that you just write it in a notebook and hope that you remember it down the line. At least this way, you are taking the messaging, you are taking the insights that you're learning from these big events, and then you're putting them out to the audience. And so you position yourself as somebody who cares about, the extra learning that you're partaking in when it comes to this industry, because we all know that the creator economy is growing in this space, and more insights are coming to these bigger events now that things are starting, pretty much have been opened up for the past year now. But taking that insight and taking the extra mile with it is one of the bigger tips that I think a lot of companies are missing the mark on.
I think that you are completely right when you're talking about that war room mentality. And I think it also extends to when you're talking to the people who are there, looking at these individual talents. You can almost treat going to a conference and getting out and networking as like a scouting report. And you know what? Even if you've got someone who's there and they say they're entrenched in their role and they love where they're working, if you're someone who's looking for that fresh talent, or even to kind of get a pulse on what that talent is feeling about the sentiment of the industry, a conference is the perfect place to do that. And when you're making that scouting report, obviously it involves a lot of shaking hands, it involves a lot of talking to folks, getting their contact information. But how do you go and then take that back and then make it a buildable, useful, almost roster for yourself, your company, either of resources and connects or potential talent or anywhere in between?
Well, I would really sort of put a strong focus on before you go to a big event, I would put a strong focus on what you're going to do the day you get back, days after you get back, because that was one of my more weaker parts. Whenever I would come back from a conference, I'm just so exhausted from traveling and from, doing all the peopling and talking to so many people that you get exhausted. But ahead of time, if I would have thought it thoroughly, I would have thought out a good plan, then I would have had a messaging campaign. I would have reached out to everybody that I would have met on LinkedIn, send a personalized note of how I met them. And so it's setting up that process ahead of time and setting up that plan ahead of time that I think a lot of people, including myself, miss the mark on, where you could really take advantage of everybody that you meet, whether or not they want to become, maybe a coworker of yours or maybe work with you in the future. Write down little notes of how you met somebody on their business card in the notes app in your phone. So then that way, whenever you're on the plane ride back, whenever you're in the car on the way back, it makes it much easier to do that follow-up. And then also having a distribution plan, an email marketing plan in order to reach out to those people, not only on social media, but also via email as well. So you can just keep that little conversation open in case they were to change their mind in the future. Because for a lot of job seekers, it's much easier to find a job whenever you are currently employed than when you're not employed or when you've been unfortunately laid off. And so those are the kind of employees that you would want to seek out, are the ones that are already taken and the ones that are happy in their position. So you can really start that communication strategy ahead of time before you even get to the conference. So then that way you're capitalizing on that conference and that freshness of meeting someone, then you can keep that conversation and that connection going. Because really with a lot of these events, it's really about meeting people in a digital environment first and then making those connections in an in-person environment or vice versa. But you want to make sure you have a plan for both.
Blythe, these are all excellent points. And when we're looking at keeping that connection going or keeping it fresh or make sure it is still fresh, is there a window that you really gonna need to hit when you're looking at maybe doing a follow-up after meeting someone at a conference, something like that? Should it be like within the first week? Or, if you wait a month, is it a little bit too long? Is there a kind of sweet spot there?
I've kind of done both just because of the fact that I didn't have that plan, going into the conference. But luckily, taking notes while at the conference really helped a ton, because then I was able to trigger some kind of a memory for myself, because you're meeting so many people, but also for the person on the other end of that communication, because they likely went through the same thing. They're not going to remember every single person that they had a conversation with. But as soon as you have that conversation, you can write down a few little notes about what they said, what they did. And that kind of brings up another example from sports. The Savannah Bananas, which is a minor league baseball team, they actually they take images of what their customers, so they did the hard work of getting their customers to the games, but every 30 minutes, they snap a picture of what the crowd is doing during the actual game. And so they study what their customers are doing instead of what they actually say. And I think that that's an important connotation too, because then they were able to add extra entertainment into the game itself. So where they found where people were leaving on average, an hour before the game was over. But now, because of their different antics that they have closer to the end of the games, they're finding that more than 90% of their fans are staying throughout the entire game in order to see it. And so for anybody who is running, conferences and events, and you want to figure out ways to, extend that conversation to extend that, enjoyment of folks that are at your event, that's one way to do it, is to study what they do, not necessarily what they say. And I think that that's also a good play for whenever you're having these conversations with folks, is studying where those key contacts are going. What talks are they participating in? What insights did they draw from the talks that they participated in that maybe you weren't in that same room? And so these are all different ways that you can study what your customers are doing and borrow that idea from sports, and then focus on how you can optimize that for future events or future meetups.
Blythe, you mentioned Savannah Bananas, and myself and Sydney Edwards, who's back here behind the camera, both just go, oh my God, we love the Savannah Bananas. Neither of us have ever been to a Bananas game, but we watched them on TikTok, and we've seen their TikTok presence is just A1. And that's another great example of how not only can you be appealing, no pun intended, to your audience who's there at your games, but also attract a separate audience if you do your marketing well and do it right and show people that you're fun and exciting and not just a baseball team, right? Or not just a logistics company. And that's, I think, is something that we can take all of us for a lesson too, right? Is just because you're a business or you are something that's supposed to be a little bit more serious doesn't mean that you can't have fun and attract a different audience.
100%, because there's another great example that is taken from other industries, and that's the idea of gifting. And so gift boxes, customized gift boxes prior to an event. I attended an event about a year ago from Six River Systems, and they sent, prior to their virtual event, they sent over a happy hour kit. And so that made me more likely to attend their virtual event because I had this cool happy hour kit, and they were going to have a bartender that was on air and teaching you how to make these different drinks with the kit that they sent. And so, of course, I come not just for the bar tipping event, but I come for the insight that they're sharing before and afterwards as well. So it's really about enticing folks to use these different ideas. And you can make there's all kinds of kits that exist that you can just buy on a one-time basis, or you can get them customized with your company branding. There's lots of different ways that you can attack that. Maybe it's a yoga retreat, or a yoga session, which is something that FreightWaves has done in the past, where everybody's doing yoga together. So it's one of those things where getting creative and bringing things that aren't necessarily logistics related and bringing them into your event and bringing them into your conference are all ways that you can borrow ideas from other industries and bring them in. So you're not thinking of logistics marketing or B2B marketing as boring. It's up to us to spice it up and to make it more interesting. And these are some ways that other industries are doing it.
Blythe, this has been incredibly insightful. As always, thanks so much for joining us this morning. When can people find Cyberly?
They're every Thursday at 2 p.m. We're going to kind of be diving into some more data and analytics. We've been doing it over the last few weeks. So we're going to dive into a new study by the logisticsmarketing.com in order to find out how shippers actually want to be contacted from your company. And it's not the cold call.
All right, Blythe, thank you for joining us this morning. Great to have you as always. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Right now, we're going to toss it over for a look at the top stories on freightwaves.com.